Now, as I said at the beginning, I should be delighted to hear any points you may wish to make, any challenges you may wish to suggest to the kind of picture I have painted for you, or indeed questions to elucidate some point over which I've gone perhaps too quickly, because I have covered so many points that it's very hard to do justice to any one of them. So who would like to put a point, and I would do my best to respond. Please.
When you look at...
Would it be as well if you stood up so everyone could hear you? Sorry. Because there's quite a lot of people behind.
When you look at the policies of the current set of presidential primary candidates, you see for the first time that it's a political necessity to have a fairly detailed environmental policy. And I wonder how optimistic you are about both those candidates and about political leadership across the world, that they kind of have the courage and realize the scale of climate change.
Well, on the question of climate change, there has, of course, been an enormous change in public attitudes in the last little while. When I first started on it, which was, I'm sorry to tell you, more than 30 years ago, my interest in it was regarded as extremely nutty. It was regarded as being something very eccentric. Today, almost everyone knows about climate change. But what to do about it, of course, is the most difficult issue. And I think that awareness of the problem has not so far led to action to take measures to cope with it, insofar as you can take measures to cope with it. But I would simply say this, that change in general proceeds from three different factors. The first is when somebody gives leadership in how to change things. And to be fair to Margaret Thatcher, she it was who really drew attention to the climate issue in the 1980s, as no one else had done before then. The second factor is when people like yourselves in non-governmental organizations, or the public generally, gets agitated about something and puts pressure on governments to do something. And that can, of course, lead to funny election results, but it can also underline the fact that people feel something needs to be done. Whether you're Greenpeace or an individual, nonetheless, you wish to protest and you wish to make your point. And the third factor, which perhaps is the one that is most effective, is what I call benign catastrophes. That's to say, when something goes identifiably wrong, and for that reason there is public demand for action to correct it. And if I'm allowed to tell a story, I was in China in 1998 at the time of the great Yangtze floods of that year. And I was then a member of an international group which advised the Chinese government on its environmental issues. And so at the beginning, I, on behalf of the international members, expressed our condolences on the loss of life in the Yangtze floods, which had just happened. And I was interrupted by the Prime Minister of China, Chu Rongji, who said, more or less, thanks, but no thanks. We Chinese know that we are to blame for what happened, because we had cut down the trees, we had destroyed the topsoils, we had diverted the rivers, we'd filled in the lakes, and so when the storms came, as they always do come, we found ourselves suffering enormous losses of life, as well as, of course, of property and crops. And he said, as of yesterday, I have forbidden timber cutting on the upper Yangtze. So he was able to identify the two, and I can think of examples when that has not been done. For example, in Southeast Asia, when the Niño-Niña phenomenon takes place, people don't always realize what's happening, and so they just scream their heads off but don't draw the right conclusions. So wherever you go, you find that a benign catastrophe, that is a catastrophe which can be read and understood with leading to results, although, of course, it is a kind of catastrophe that I would not wish on anyone in this room. Now, I don't know whether I've fully answered your question, but those three factors coming together are what induces change. In the case of climate, at the moment, we are seeing eccentric climate all over the place. And I always prefer to talk about climate destabilization rather than climate change, because that is what we can see. At the moment, you've got the Chinese suffering from the worst storms and the worst snowfalls in 50 years. We've seen eccentric weather in Argentina and South America. We've had droughts, severe droughts in parts of the United States, including Arizona and the middle and the southwest. And we've had some rather funny weather here as well. Now, whether that really adds up to anything like a catastrophe, we won't know. because climate change is by its nature uncertain, and you could only look back and say, this is climate change, or is it just eccentricities of weather? But we know what the natural changes are. What we're trying to identify at the moment are the human-made changes. And that is something that, of course, the science has advanced a great deal. It's worth saying that currently the quantity of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is the highest for 650,000 years. And that each year we can see that quantity increasing, and we know clearly that there is a relationship between carbon dioxide and the heat on the surface of the Earth. And there are many other things of the same kind. We know, for example, that the frequency of hurricanes is related to the warmth of the ocean surface. And there are other things of this description that I could mention. But by and large, we can see climate destabilization happening. That is something that I think that the public is well capable of appreciating. And as the science becomes more and more involved with the politics and the economics and the social changes brought about by climate change, so political actions to cope to the extent we can cope will become more possible. Now, who else would like to ask a point, please?
If economy and society were to move away from consumerism, how would you envisage that to work? What could move forward in its place?
I said in the course of my talk, I said that we need to rethink a lot of economics. Economics is very much hitched at the moment to things like growth and GNP or GDP, all showing how societies are getting richer or getting poorer. And we know that some countries have been, on that reckoning, certain countries have been getting richer and other ones have been getting poorer. But this is rather a crude way of doing things. Of course, productivity is very important and production of things is important. But it's only a part of the story. We now say get rid away from consumerism. We want, in fact, to focus less on just the ability to produce more objects and buy more objects and provide what is the current lifeblood of society that is at present constituted. We want instead to look much more at long-term sustainability, human welfare, and bringing in what economists call externalities, which are the true costs of what you may do. The Chinese have already had a go at doing this. It's created a lot of debate and a lot of rather ferocious argument in China itself, because of course some people want to go for the kind of Western calculations of growth and GDP and the rest of it, and others want to say, well, that's only up to a certain point. Well, on one of my visits to China, we once went to a place where, according to the GNP register of things, everything was getting much better. In fact, we saw ruined townships, heavily polluted areas, and all the rest of it, because they'd not brought in the costs of the externalities, the price that you pay for producing things, and the price you pay for not having proper regard for human welfare and human society. So we want, in fact, to produce a kind of different kind of society in which this is certainly an element, but is by no means all the elements. And reading some of the stuff that I was reading today in the train coming up here in The Economist, you can see that that lesson has still to be learnt in quite a lot of important quarters.
I would like to ask you if you have a stand on how the UK could use the diplomatic muscle on the next stage of the Kyoto Protocol in order to get the United States on board at the next stage of the Kyoto Protocol.
Well, as you know,